Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teachers and Inspector Calls. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Mr. Arthur Birling, the patriarch of the family. I'll take you through some big ideas, some key quotations, and some analysis of language structure and form. So let's get started. Okay, so let's just start with reminding ourselves who Mr. Birling is. He is, of course, the patriarch of the Birling family. And what does he represent? Well, Mr. Birling is fairly straightforward. He represents the capitalist ideologies, but more importantly, he also expresses how the lower classes are exploited in order to maintain said capitalist ideologies. And we'll see that in the way that he treats Eva Smith, but also we can look at the way that he treats women as a whole as well, which is quite interesting. If we start with the early depictions, as always, straight into J.B. Priestley's stage directions, which are so very telling. So we have Arthur Birling as a heavy-looking, rather portentous man in his middle 50s with fairly easy manners, but rather provincial in his speech. His wife is about 50, rather cold, and her husband social superior. So even though this bit is about Sybil Birling, it's very telling because of this bit about being his social superior, which is backed up with this adjective here, the fact that he's provincial in his speech, the suggestion that he sort of perhaps lacks some sort of sophistication. This is one of our first points about Mr. Birling, is that actually there are some class tensions in this family. He has married up. Now, that, I think, creates in his characterisation a certain sense of insecurity about himself. Particularly, we do notice Mrs. Birling sort of telling him off from time to time for his faux pas. But he counters, I think, perhaps those social insecurities through, for example, name dropping. So this is actually Arthur Birling's first bit of speech. Priestley immediately draws attention to his wealth because they're drinking port. But it's not just they're drinking port. We've got the reference to Finchley, who says that it is the same port that Gerald's father gets from him, so the port merchant. The important thing there is, of course, Gerald Croft is son of Lord Croft. So as well as drinking expensive drinks, he's also drinking the right stuff and trying to align himself with his social superiors once more. But like I said, it doesn't quite go to plan all of the time. He makes faux pas, for example, telling Sybil to say well done to the cook in front of Gerald, which was an absolute no-no. And in private with Gerald, he actually addresses class distinctions between the two families. I have an idea that your mother, Lady Croft, while she doesn't object to my girl, feels you might have done better for yourself socially. So this is an incredibly awkward thing to highlight. It's another one of his social blunders. There are more blunders, not just social ones. Priestley uses dramatic irony to reveal a very important aspect of Birling's character, which is that he thinks he knows everything, but of course he doesn't. So dramatic irony, if you have forgotten, is when the audience knows something that the characters on the stage don't. Now, key to this is the setting of the play, because of course it was first performed in 1945, but it was set in 1912. So the audience has the benefit of all of that knowledge that they have, they have lived through these years. So they know that what Mr. Birling is saying is not true or not going to be true. So first little mention, he talks about the miners' strikes. He refers to labour trouble in the future as wild talk, that adjective wild suggesting that it's pretty much not even possible. And then we've got this wonderful declarative, we've passed the worst of it. And of course, everyone in the audience knows that labour trouble continued, the difficulties between the two governments continued all the way through. We also have this marvellous bit. You'll hear some people say that war is inevitable, and to that I say fiddlesticks. Now, that dramatic irony is emphasised not just by the hyphen creating a little pause, but also by this very kind of colloquial term given to us in an exclamative, demonstrating just how daft Birling thinks the concept of war is. And of course, We have 2 wars yet to come. So again, the audience can see that. And then the final bit is, of course, on the Titanic, sailing next week, every luxury, unsinkable, absolutely unsinkable. Again, the dramatic irony being emphasized here through not just the repetition, but this lovely adverb, absolutely. It's all about his complete certainty. So what is the impact of the dramatic irony? Level 1, it shows that he's a fool. Yeah, fine, absolutely, you can get some points for that. But you need to think more about the overarching symbolism and precise intentions. So it's saying don't trust him. It's saying don't trust his judgment. So if we know that the things that he thinks, the things that he is certain of are incorrect, then it means that we question what he represents, which is obviously capitalist ideology. And it means that we question his judgment in his dealings with Eva Smith. And on that note, he's a hard-headed businessman. Now, this quote is used twice, although the second time it chucks in practical as well, but the repetition is very important. So if you are a hard-headed businessman, that perhaps suggests that you don't let things get to you, you don't get emotional. So he's boasting about being ruthless. Let's see some of these ruthless business tactics at work. Now, I'm not going straight to Eva Smith. I'm thinking about Sheila, because Sheila is nothing more than a sort of negotiation. This marriage to Gerald is like a business contract being negotiated. Look at what he says. This is in the toast, the engagement toast. Your father and I, so he's addressing Gerald, have been friendly rivals in business for some time, though Crofts Limited are both older and bigger than Birling and Company. That adjective is, of course, key because it reminds us of their longevity and heritage, something that he no doubt wants. Perhaps now you've brought us together, we're no longer going to be competing, but working together for lower costs and higher prices. So here is the actual priority. Here is the reason for this alliance between Gerald and Sheila. It's got nothing to do with love, and it's got all to do with business connections. So yeah, he is a hard-headed businessman. Sorry. And now, of course, let's talk about Eva Smith. So obviously Inspector Goole questions why he fired Eva Smith, and it's all to do with keeping labour costs down. It has got nothing to do with care for her and whether or not they have a decent standard of living or ability to survive. But yeah, look at this. If they didn't like those rates, they could go and work somewhere else. It's a free country, I told them. What a kick in the teeth. Because to them, it's not a free country. Freedom is only granted to those who can afford it. And it's not just the fact that she was asking for that money. It was the fact that she dared speak. This girl, Eva Smith, was one of them. She'd had a lot to say, far too much. So she had to go. Note this parenthesis that suggests that there is a limit on what a woman is allowed to speak about, or for how long a woman is allowed to speak. And she had had her quota. So her punishment for daring to speak and speak up for her friends and peers was punishment. And whilst I'm on the note of punishment, Priestley, by having Arthur Birling as someone who is a social inferior to Mrs. Birling and to Lord Croft, is telling us that he has done some social climbing. Mr. Birling, at some point, or Mr. Birling's family, were working class. No doubt about that. They've managed to rise to middle class because of the successes of their business, okay, and that's what has allowed him to marry up, to marry Sybil. So out of everyone in that family, he is the one person that should know better. He is the one person that should really know the plight of the working classes and should understand that when they ask for a pay rise, it's about survival. So actually, that's a really good example of this hard-headed, emotionless. He cuts off his own experience in order to keep costs down. And it's this kind of attitude, this willingness to exploit the vulnerable and to take, that Goole, Inspector Goole, is trying to challenge. Birling versus Goole sounds very dramatic, but I think it's very important that when Goole arrives, it is Mr Birling, the patriarch, who, as in the person in power of this family, that Goole interrupts. Look at what it is that Birling is saying. This is a fabulous little dramatic device here. So Priestley uses this wonderful simile or analogy to show Birling's scorn of socialist values about caring for other people. You'd think everyone has to look after everybody else, as if we were all mixed up together like bees in a hive. What a great simile. Community and all that nonsense. Look at the tone here, the scorn that equates community, looking after those around you, to nothing more than nonsense. And here we have the direct message. A man has to mind his own business, look after himself and his own, and note the interruption. And what interrupts is the sharp ring of a doorbell. This is a wonderful moment of symbolism. The fact that Priestley chooses to use the adjective sharp there, suggesting that it's difficult, that it's unpleasant perhaps, or the sense of discomfort. And who is there at the door? It's Mr Goole. So Mr Goole, Inspector Goole interrupts this capitalist speech, which is of course symbolic for what Inspector Goole is trying to do. He's trying to stop these views in their tracks so they will change. Birling versus Goole. Who wins in the end? Well, let's look at what his priorities are. Glimmer of hope. Each character, with the exception of the dreadful Mrs Birling, you get a glimmer of hope that some of them come to fruition, some of them don't. Here's Birling's little adverb of manner: unhappily. Look, Inspector, I'd give thousands, yes, thousands, in order to bring it back, like if he could pay his way out. But notice that he's not saying I regret, he's trying to fix with money, which isn't great, but at least there is a suggestion of regret. And obviously 1912, thousands is a serious amount of money. But does he mean it, or is this just an empty idea, like an empty promise? Well, look at his response afterwards. This is before he even realizes that Inspector Goole isn't real. Don't you realize yet all you've done? Most of this is bound to come out. There'll be a public scandal. So what is he worried about? He's worried about his reputation, because that's right, he's obsessed with his own social standing. I don't care now. You don't seem to care about anything. Irony. But I care. What does he care about, though? What is his priority? I was almost certain for a knighthood in the next honours list. So everything that he cares about is self-centric. It's all about him and position. It's all about social standing and class. And when it comes down to it, what really bothers him about Eric is what he's done from a monetary perspective. It's bringing the business and his reputation into disrepute, meaning that he possibly won't get his knighthood, but he doesn't give two hoots about the fact that he got a girl pregnant out of wedlock, that he essentially sexually assaulted a young, vulnerable woman. No, it's about the fact that he took money. So even in the kind of most dramatic moment of Inspector Goole's teaching, he is still only seeing it from a self-centric position. And that is why he, alongside Mrs Birling, do represent that older generation that, according to Priestley and the inspector, because he is, of course, a mouthpiece for Priestley, is that they are actually incapable of change. Mrs Birling doesn't even budge for a second. And by the end, what do we have here from Birling? Well, check out our adverbs of manner in our stage directions. Jovially, so that's jokey. Heartily, so full of enthusiasm. There's this real sense of happiness, and look at the way that he is mocking the whole situation. The fact that he imitates the inspector, you all helped to kill her. So the imitating of the inspector demonstrates how little a lesson he has learnt. I think Priestley wants us to really, really dislike him at this moment. And it's not just the mocking of the younger generation here and the fact that they still care about the situation. Look at what he says to Sheila. Look, you'd better ask Gerald for that ring you gave back to him, hadn't you? Then you'll feel better. Doesn't seem to care about the fact that his daughter's fiance has had an affair whilst they have been courting. That doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. He just wants to get the show back on the road, i.e., let's make sure these two families are united so that my business continues to thrive. And literally right towards the very, very end, where he's still mocking, but Priestley has him comment on the famous younger generation who know it all. There's so much irony here because, of course, it is Eric and Sheila who do know it all, and it is Birling that is unable to see that. Dreadful character. Priestley did a very good job. Just like Mrs. Birling, no sense of character development, no change. Massively representative of this issue that he has, that he's saying that they are not physically capable. That's it from me. So thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions or comments, just whack them up in the comments and I will get back to you. Thank you very much if you have subscribed to my channel already. I really appreciate it. If you haven't, do click that button and then you'll get notifications of when the next sets of videos are out. Okay, thanks again. Happy revising.